again, this is Naomi Hattaway with the Permission Granted Summit, and I'm so excited today to have Sarah Holland and Beth Silvers. They are the duo behind Pantsuit Politics, and I'm so excited that you guys are here, and I'm ready to deep dive into some big conversations. How are you both?
Doing great.
Thank you so much for having us. We love big conversations.
Yeah, I do too. So let's just jump right in. We have a lot of listeners who live internationally, in the US and abroad as well. And while the United States has kind of been under the microscope lately, our world in general could be described as kind of a mess. We all look at our world through different glasses and different lenses. What do you guys say about how we can bring more nuances to the clashes that we have globally? How can we bring more awareness to culture wars, to look at it from a big world view? Is that possible?
Beth, you want me to go or you want to go first?
Sure, go right ahead, Sarah.
I think that it is hard to bring nuance when we think about the globe because it can seem so overwhelming. So I think the easiest way to bring a nuanced perspective when we feel overwhelmed by the state of the world is to sort of look to the old adage, how do you eat an elephant a bite at a time? And sometimes the best way is to just think through your own life and your own daily decisions and just take the next decision you make or the next conversation you have or the next situation you find yourself in, and not to make global conflict about individual choices, although I guess on some level it is, and not to say that all happiness can be found in individual choices, because I do believe that we are a part of systems and those are important and they affect our daily lives. But I think that our brains, for better or for worse, kind of tend to shut down when you take it to this sort of global, when you talk about the globe like that. And sometimes nuance is best found when we take it into a more manageable piece.
There are so many things that I think we have decided are trite that we need to come back to embracing on that individual level. I feel most connected to the globe when I am in some kind of space that feels sacred to me. So I love to walk at night and look at the moon and think about the fact that that's the moon that's everybody's moon, right? That's Kim Jong-il's moon, and Kim Jong-un's moon. And so when I'm at church and we say the Lord's Prayer, I like to think about the fact that people all over the globe have some kind of prayer, right? And it can be different than mine, but that we all are searching for that connection to something. I felt that really profoundly when I visited Stonehenge. So whether you are a spiritual person or not, I think connecting to things that feel sacred in some way or special or shared is the first way to get past this sense of us and them. And that, to me, is just finding our shared humanity is the first step to having a more nuanced discussion about global conflict.
And that individual connection to a bigger piece and that sacredness brings so much great perspective for me. Like when I do that and I think that I'm sure things felt really dire in the Middle Ages, and I'm sure things felt really dire in the middle of World War II. And I'm sure the world felt like it was in a complete and total mess at very different parts in the world's history. And here we are, and we keep moving forward. And that's not to just say absolve ourselves of any responsibility to try to address our problems, but just that perspective can always be helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I like that. And I think that goes also to all of us just starting to learn more about our own selves and how we do find those connections and how we do open ourselves up to other people's experiences. You guys talk a lot about exiting the echo chamber. What are the challenges that you find? Because I think that some of the people watching aren't even aware that they are in one. What are some of the challenges that we face if we stay inside that echo chamber?
Here, I started last time, Beth. You start this time.
Well, I think the first issue with the echo chamber is recognizing it, which I think is really difficult to do. In America, at least, I think we have curated our news and our information and our entertainment in ways that are designed to keep us comfortable at all times. And that comfort has become like a drug a little bit. And Sarah and I have had a lot of conversations lately about social media as a tool that has done a lot of good in our lives personally, that is the source of our friendship and our podcast, and also that keeps us, that narrows and narrows and narrows the things that influence us, because over time we make choices that reinforce things that make us feel good. And so for us, exit the echo chamber is not saying change yourself or change your values. It's saying be open to different inputs that will strengthen who you are. And that can come out in a lot of different directions. Maybe it will make you think differently about something. Maybe it will just make you think more deeply about something. But be willing to be uncomfortable. I think the only way that we move forward with anything is to get rid of this addiction to comfort that we have. And that, for me, is what it's really about. How can I intentionally make myself uncomfortable? Because I know that discomfort is the only way to work through all of the issues that I feel immersed in.
I had a really profound sort of aha moment this weekend about the connection between the echo chamber that fuels our partisan divide and the presence of so many distractions in our daily lives. I was reading a really great article that said basically when our brains are limited resources, our attention and our brain power itself is a finite resource. And when we are distracted, as we increasingly are in a world, a global world with a massive amount of input, our brains take the path of least resistance.
Which is comfort.
Which is comfort, which is distraction, which is fear, which is blame, which is in politics, it's not my fault, it's their fault.
Yeah.
And that they can be Republicans, it can be Democrats, it can be immigrants, it can be anyone with a different color skin. It can be women, it could be men, it could be, there's a lot of choices.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of choices. To say that my brain is uncomfortable, I'm uncomfortable in this situation, I don't know the answer, I'm not really sure I understand the problem. I think that addressing the problem or seeking an answer could make me make hard choices, could make me sacrifice things that I like, that bring me a large amount of comfort. Anytime we bump up against any of that, we have this little thing in our hand that will take us away. Mm-hmm. It's a Calgon.
Yeah.
Little hits of little hits of dopamine whenever we need them.
And not only something that will take us away, but something that allows us to have our opinions voiced quickly without much thought to who's on the other side. So there's kind of a dual thing that our phones give us.
There was this great line in an article that I sent Beth that I just read it and I thought, I am going to have to be thinking about this for a very long time. It says the attention economy incentivizes the design of technologies that grab our attention. In so doing, it privileges our impulses over our intentions. And I think impulse over intention sums up a lot going on in our lives, in our culture, in our societies, in our institutions, and in our politics.
Yeah. Especially even if you look just at the social media part of it, different platforms are introducing the 3 little dots, which keeps your impulse. You want to see who's going to type something and your impulse.
Oh yeah, the dots. It's so true. The dots.
The dots. Horrible.
I hadn't even thought about the dots. Those dots.
Yeah. I won't get started because I will talk about that for a long time. But that does challenge your intention because you're, yeah. One of the things you talked about with Exit the Echo Chamber was the suggestion to read 3 pieces that offer opinions that are different from yours. And that's interesting in our house because my husband and I both have opposite viewpoints and vote differently. And so that's easier for me because the opposite news.
You just roll over in bed.
It's right there. It's been a fun couple of months and years for sure. But it's easy for me because it is literally in my house. But I think for some people, like you were talking about, Beth, you would have to intentionally go to a different news channel, or you'd have to choose a different newspaper for some. Is that enough? Does it go further? Or is that a good start for some people to just start by reading something that's not what you would normally ingest?
I've been thinking about that a lot, and I think it differs by person. For some of us, just reading something new is a big step. And for others, maybe that's not the right order, because I do think there is, in your marriage, for example, you remember all the time that this is a person I love, and this is a person who shares my values in a deep way, and we're just expressing those values differently, or we're prioritizing them differently, or whatever leads you to different political conclusions. My husband and I had a really intense conversation about guns over the weekend because he grew up around guns. I did not. We just have vastly different views about guns. And it was an intense conversation. It was a challenging conversation, but we were able to have it because we're so clear on the fact that our relationship is the priority. Sarah and I talk about this with the podcast. We're so clear that our friendship is more important than anything else that we're doing. So it makes it easy to dive into hard stuff because we feel a sense of security. Chad and I will love each other at the end of this conversation about guns. You and your husband will love each other. Sarah and I will be friends at the end of this conversation about whatever we're talking about. And so when we first did Exit the Echo Chamber, I thought, maybe the first step is a more external perspective. I'm starting to wonder, though, if for many of us, connecting with someone we otherwise love, right? and recalling that this is a person we otherwise love, and instead of saying, because we love each other, we won't talk about this, saying, because we love each other, we will talk about this. Because we love each other, we will go right to this, and know that we will still love each other at the end of it. I think that might be key to certainly starting to bridge some of the divide in American politics. I also think that's key to thinking about how what we do in America impacts the rest of the world, and thinking about the physical world, right? And our shared responsibility for the physical world.
I think that we've been working on a show about nuanced relationships in which you have political divides within the marriages. And what comes up a lot in our listeners who are in these relationships is, it's just funny to me that people think this is so defining, because there is so much more to this person than just their political beliefs. There is so much more that I know to them. And one of my friends who I spoke to yesterday, who met in law school, they talk about, like, they had so many chances to interact and get to know each other outside of the pressure to decide if it was a dating relationship. So because they were interacting as students in a law school, they got to know each other, as opposed to, I got to swipe left or right now and decide of this list of characteristics about you is something I want to date, right? So there was this outside situation in order to form the trust relationship outside of politics or what your characteristics on a piece of paper are. And then that's what led to the relationship. And I told them, I think that these relationships offer a really good insight for the whole country and a really interesting path forward. I read an article in the New York Times a while back that said interracial couples offer the path forward for a racially divided nation, which I think is true. And I also think that politically divided couples offer a path forward, hey, this is a thing. Everybody remember, like, this is a thing that can happen.
Well,
and it can be really beautiful.
Yeah. And it's very curious to me because the people that know my husband assume that we are both of that bent, and the people that know me more assume that we are both of that political persuasion. And it's fascinating to watch the looks on their faces when we bring up the fact that we just had a discussion that showcases the fact that we do not believe the same way in terms of our political choices. Because people are kind of shocked by it. They're like, well, how does that even work? So yeah, big conversation around that. So going along with that, you guys say that anything that's going to be good is going to be hard. And if you're not a little bit sweaty, you're not doing it right. What are some suggestions for those who have families, family members, spouses, partners that are living in the same home? Because I know that there are people that don't believe the same as their partner in terms of their politics and their values sometimes, and they're not talking about it because they'd rather not, or because it's too hard, or because they don't want to involve the kids, or how do we approach discussions maybe in a very practical way so that we can move forward and have more of a path of understanding?
I mean, I think,
go ahead.
I think that part of the is talking about intention. So the intention is not to come to the table and change the person's mind. The intention is not to have one conversation that's going to fix everything, because that's what we like in America. We want one quick solution in our healthcare, in our purchases, in our home. We want the quick before and after on HGTV where they do like months of work in 5 minutes. Like we want all that all the time. And so I think the idea is to look at it as a practice. It's just going to be a practice that we're all going to have to, and sometimes it's not going to go great. Sometimes we're going to have a conversation. We're going to leave and think, why'd I do that? Why is this person in my life? Do I even know who this person is? That's going to happen sometimes. That's what happens when you interact with human beings. You bump up against things you don't like because we're not all the same. And acknowledging that it's a practice that makes us better, that it's a practice in order to get to know myself better, not just to convince the other person. And to use it as I heard this expression once, and I heard it in a weird situation, so bear with me, but it was on Sister Wives, the television show, which I used to really love. And one of the women said, we have sister wives because it forces us to rough our rub edges off. Facing that jealousy and the sharing and all the things that you can imagine go with having a sister wife is this, they feel like it's a spiritual exercise. And so when you are going to go into conversations with people who have different values and different politics than you, it's going to rub your rough edges off. It's a spiritual exercise, and it's a spiritual journey, and it's not outcome driven. It's intention driven. And if we can keep all of that in mind, I think we could make some progress.
Yeah, so I would add to that. My thing I think about a lot from a pop culture influence perspective, Sarah's a Sister Wives, I think about Jewel and this whole idea of, if I could tell the world just one thing, it would be we're all okay. We are okay. And I think that the reason we avoid these conversations so much is because we don't believe we're okay. We do think, gosh, we're going to have a discussion where we disagree about guns and we're going to get divorced at the end of it. When you think about what you want to teach your children, I don't want to teach my girls that if I am disciplining them, I don't love them anymore, right? Every time I have an intense conversation about behavior with them, I always start and end with, I love you. Because I love you, I'm going to tell you that what you just did is unacceptable, and here's what the consequence is going to be, and I still love you at the end of this, and let's go back to our day. We don't put everything about our parenting relationship into the framework of discipline, which is the conflict that we have there. I don't know why in all of our relationships we've decided that politics is the conflict that we can't engage in. But I believe that because we've done that, we've gotten less adept at engaging in other forms of healthy conflict. And I think that has bled into our organizations and our relationships and the rest of our lives. I think our unwillingness to engage in that practice, as Sarah was talking about, is hurting us everywhere. We spoke at an event last week and talked about how when you avoid conflict, you're trading your short-term comfort for long-term dysfunction. And I think the more we are willing to exercise those muscles, go through that spiritual exercise, it will pay enormous dividends. I think our relationships can be better for that disagreement, can be stronger for that disagreement if we're willing to continue to do it. And our confidence will withstand all of that. We know I'm okay at the end of this. Even if somebody doesn't agree with me or thinks my position is wholly unsupported, I'm okay. And that's what I want to teach my kids about love, for sure. Love with my partner. And it's really what I want to teach them in general.
And I think that what happens, look, when Beth said, we're going to disagree with guns, we're going to get divorced at the end. I think that we're a society driven by impulse, and we're a society that puts emotion. We treat emotion like reality. I always say your emotions are relevant, but they are not reality. And it took me a long time to learn that. I have a husband of the same political persuasion as I am. And for the first 10 years of our marriage, every time we fought and he hurt my feelings, I thought, he doesn't love me and we should get divorced. That was exhausting. But that's how I felt, because I think I had heard the message that how you feel is what is happening. Yeah. That's reality. But that's not accurate. My husband does love me very much, and he loved me even when he was mad at me. Yeah. But it took me 10 years to figure that out. And now that I have figured it out, recently, again, 36, it has taken me way too long to figure this out too. I will have somebody come at me because I'm a politician now in my hometown. That happens. Or in my personal relationships, that I will feel somebody come at me, and I like to think this is Beth's influence on me. And I know I'm okay. I know what they're saying is not true. I know that I'm rubbing up against their emotions.
Yeah.
But it does not have to affect me. And so I have practiced being quiet in those situations, something I have never been capable of doing in my 36 years. Usually I just fight back. And recently I've just gone quiet. I just get quiet. And dang, it works.
Yeah.
It works so well.
Well, and so our experience also is because we've been practicing that as well. And when we're quiet after we've asked the other spouse why they feel that way, it's been challenging us also because we're quiet in our own mind as well. And we've been looking back and going, wait a minute, actually what I think that I believe is the culmination of the generations past that actually might not be what I really believe. It's just been what I've been spouting for years. So it's been interesting to have those discussions. And I like the part about being quiet because that really
it's hot. Listen, I got most talkative in high school. This is not a tool I've used in my life. But, my stepfather has a very bad temper. He is very curmudgeonly, has been my whole life. And for, years, I would either yell back or I would argue or I would try to debate him and try to, either shame him or guilt him or whatever. And recently I've just gone quiet, and dang, every time he's like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have acted like that. Like immediately I'm like, wait, could this have worked this whole time? I've spent a lot of emotional energy on this when I could have just been quiet. Wow.
I think that is because so few people are comfortable with discomfort that when you reach that place of being comfortable with discomfort, you hold enormous and confusing power.
Yeah.
It is confusing.
That is so true.
I had a conversation I was at a fall festival with my kids and ran into a person who I fired. And I fire people with some regularity, unfortunately. It's been a part of my job. And I genuinely like almost all of the people that I have to have that conversation with. I can separate you're a good person from you're a good worker, or you're a worker that fits in the organization where it is now. Most people cannot do that, right? And so that interaction, I think, was difficult and uncomfortable, but I'm willing to feel that, because it was important to that person to interact with me and to bring that up and to kind of sit with the fact that here's this thing while our kids are off playing together. Here's this thing that exists between us as adults. That sucks. But that is the only way, right? Because I'm not going to go find but there's a parallel here, right? Because politically, when we have that kind of gap with someone, we say, cool, I'm going to go find my enclave of people who think exactly like me and who validate everything I have. And I'm going to talk about you as the enemy instead of, I had to fire you and you're still my friend and neighbor and I still care about you and we're both people and we live here in this community together and there's a season for everything and life's going to keep moving forward.
And I just want to say, I want to just pull a full Dr. Phil right now and be like, how's that working for us, America? Are we all very comfortable in our current environment? Is something you say about America right now, man, I'm really comfortable in this environment? I don't think so. I don't think it's working. I think we have traded that comfort in the short-term comfort for long-term dysfunction.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was just thinking about when Beth was talking, I don't think it's an accident that the thing that Beth and I bonded over originally and sort of reconnected our relationship was labor. And both of us had natural labor. And we talked a lot about having space for pain and the purpose of pain and the purpose of the discomfort of labor and delivery and how that served us and how the tools we use to get comfortable. I don't think that's an accident either.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the things I want to make sure that we have time to talk about, because this is something that I am very passionate about. There's a quote, Jacqueline Woodson says, I do not know if these hands will become Malcolm's, raised and fisted, or Martin's, open and asking, or James's, curled around a pen, and she's referring to James Baldwin. I do not know if these hands will be roses or rubies, gently gloved and fiercely folded calmly in a lap, on a desk, around a book, ready to change the world. So my 11-year-old is reading Brown Girl Dreaming, which is where that quote came from. And she came to me and she said, I need to talk to you, Mama. We need to talk about the difference between Malcolm and James and Rosa and Ruby. And we had this big discussion around quiet activism and whether it always has to be loud. And there's been, and I won't go into all of the details about it, but there's been a lot of online leadership stuff happening where people are calling people out because they're not speaking up quickly enough, or they're not saying the right thing, or they are not saying anything at all, and kind of getting bashed for not choosing to be leaders during stuff that's happening. I'm of the mindset that quiet activism is important, and that we all have different leadership platforms that we sit on. And it doesn't always have to be a raised fist and a certain color of a hat. You know, I think that there's just different ways. What do you guys think about that?
Have you ever read Maya Angelou's description of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X?
No, actually.
There's a really great, I think it's In the Heart of a Woman, and she talks about, describes Malcolm X as fire and Martin Luther King as water. That's what that was like being around both of them. And I think about that all the time. And my answer would be, is there a world in which we can exist without fire? And is there a world we can exist without water? No, there isn't.
Yeah.
There isn't. In nature and in the natural world, you see both things all the time. They complement, they enhance, they draw back when needed. I mean, all you need to do is look to the natural world to see that there are different roles to be played.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just answered a question in this Ask Me Anything that we did with some of our listeners about activism. And my statement is always, you've got to figure out what your work is. Your work is going to be different than my work. I am not a person who is going to be effective in any way at a march. I think it's great that people march. I think it's important. I think it's beautiful. It's not for me. And it's not the best use of what I have to bring to the world. I am much more effective writing a letter, or recording my conversations with my friend, or doing any number of the other things that I do. And the older I get, the more confident I feel in that choice to do my work, not someone else's work, and to speak the words that I am meant to speak, not the words that someone else is meant to speak. Yeah. And I think that kind of feeds back into that idea of it's okay, you know. And I think one of the difficult things, I feel like we're beating up on social media a lot today, which is not my intention, because I do really love it. And I do think it's a powerful force for good. And I don't mean to be nostalgic or regressive about that. But I think social media has created this environment where we all feel like we have to issue a statement on every single thing that happens, and we do not. And in fact, all of that noise, when we use our voices for other people's ends, it diminishes, I think, the effectiveness of our voices when we use them for our work.
Mm-hmm.
That's so true.
And I would say that an important question to ask is that, is what you're doing or what you think other people should do, is it in service to connection, or is it in service to ego? Because I think that if it's in service to connection, then you're never going to go wrong. I mean, not never. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're thinking about, how am I connecting with my community? How am I connecting with the greater world in a way that I think serves the furtherance of conversation or dialogue or solutions? And that could be a march, or that could be a letter, or whatever it is. If it's about connection and not about showing everyone from a place of ego that you're right,
I love that.
Then you're on the right path.
Yeah, I love that. And I think to answer what you were saying about social media, we talk about this a lot in our house, that I do love social media and I'm on it all of the time, but it has changed the way we talk with each other. You know, if you look back, Twitter was at around 2006. It would be interesting to see what it would be like in today's day and age if we didn't have Twitter. You know, think of the things that would not be blown up or not be such back and forth if we didn't have the quickness of Twitter. So yeah, I love social media, but it does change where we're getting our news from and who we're getting our news from. And then the fact that engineers are designing what we see based on what we've liked or commented. So it's super interesting.
Because I think as long as when social media and technology is used or adopted from a place of intention and not a place of impulse, those same words, yeah. That's what Beth and I were just talking about. I said, it's almost like we need to think, okay, when I had a friend who posted, at what age did you give your child a phone? And there was a lot of conversation about wanting to know where the child was and being able to reach the child. Okay, if that's the intention,
yeah.
And I understand why technology can be an impulse to solve that intention, but let's just take a step back and not let technology be our first solution.
Yeah.
Let's think about the problem we're trying to solve, and let's walk through some ways that maybe we could solve it in with different tools.
Yeah.
That doesn't have to be the only tool in our tool belt.
Yeah, I agree. Can you guys hear my dogs now?
Mm-mm.
Oh, good. All three of them are going crazy. One of the last questions I wanted to ask you is about empathy mapping. Empathy is a word that everyone is using, and it's, some people, I think, misuse it or don't quite understand the definition of empathy. But how would you suggest people use empathy mapping to better understand each other? I know it's used in corporate world. I know it's used in different scenarios, but it seems like it also is really, I mean, you guys talk about it, and I think it is super helpful and beneficial. Can you share a little bit about that and why it works?
Yeah, I think empathy mapping is a way to set an intention instead of to just react. So if you know you're trying to cultivate a relationship or cultivate a conversation with someone that's going to be difficult, I think in advance of that, setting aside the time and the space to sit down and put their life on for a second to the best of your ability is a gift that you give yourself and that person going into the conversation. Now, something that I say a lot is that empathy doesn't equal endorsement. So you can put on that person's perspective and still step back and say, there's something wrong in that. You know, there are people in my life, especially from my childhood, who have perspectives about immigration that I can put on and wear. And then I can step away and still say, I understand that you feel that. I want you to understand that I don't see truth in your perspective. I see a whole lot of story in your perspective that I get that you believe it. I want to talk about why I don't see truth in that. So I think some of the resistance to empathy is thinking of empathy not as actually just trying to get yourself there, but as kind of a substitute for all perspectives are equally valid, which is not what we're talking about.
I think that with empathy, the sort of the impulse mindset we've been talking about that's driven by impulse and emotion and short-term gain is we think we want to hear, and we think people want to hear, I agree with you, instead of I hear you, which is harder. I hear you is not I agree with you. It's just I hear you, and I am a true Oprah devotee. And Oprah's genius is understanding that what people need is I hear you. I hear you. And you don't have to agree if people feel heard. And we don't do a lot of listening, which is absolutely the first step in empathy.
Yeah. Well, and I like that. You guys both said different variations, but empathy is not endorsement. Goes right along. I mean, they sideline each other. That's so great. I think that what I see happening too is that people, they don't know how to practice empathy in the way that you guys both just described. And so they choose just not to, because it feels like they're going to have to agree.
Because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. And what if they practice empathy with someone and it hurts, what if it feels too deeply or feels too much?
Yeah. I mean, empathy is painful. I mean, I spend a lot of time crying on our podcast. Okay. Like I'm a cry because it's hard to think about those things, and it is painful to think about other people's pain.
Yeah.
And some of it is unnecessary. Some of that pain is unnecessary because we have so made everything a part of our identity. And that's a product, I think, of our advertising culture.
Mm-hmm.
I like M&Ms or I don't, and now that's part of my identity. You know what I mean? And that's a silly example, but that is certainly what we've done with our politics. When I look at someone's bio on a social media platform and it is only about political issues, it makes me really sad. And I don't think we can have empathy if we keep labeling and sorting ourselves that way. anytime I'm asked to give somebody a bio for anything, I include in it that I like watermelon and poetry, because I just want people to remember that my academic credentials or my work experience or my politics or whatever is like this tiny slice of me. And because I know that about me, I can know that about them, right? I can know that you're so much more than your resume or so much more than how you voted in the last election. And that to me is when it becomes fun to dive into empathy, because what you're really doing is saying, not only do I want to understand the thing about this person that makes me uncomfortable or that makes me afraid or that challenges me, I also just want to learn about them because people are fascinating.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Nyla Merchant just wrote a book on onlyness, and then Brene Brown mentioned sorting. So they both have talked about sorting recently. And it is so true. Like, have you guys ever done the game or the exercise where you have squares on the floor and you ask people to go into the square that they most identify with, and you start with labels that are very obvious. So in my international culture, it's expat or immigrant or a love pat, someone that moved abroad for love. And then you start breaking it down, and it comes to who likes watermelon. And then you watch people move away from all those labels that they would self-sort them into and that people would judge them on, to just, oh, you like watermelon too. And it becomes this beautiful exercise of how we're all just human, and we do all have so many similarities. But until we start listening, like you were saying, Sarah, we can't even get to that point. What do you guys think? We'll start to close up. What's the biggest, most important question each of you think that we should be asking more of each other? I didn't hear you on that one.
I mean, for me, it is, who do I want to be? And knowing that I'm in control of that. I think we're so driven by external factors. I say this about Donald Trump a lot. I am not going to stay the same throughout his presidency. I'm going to get better or I'm going to get worse. But it's not going to be a neutral. And most life experiences are like that. My career is going to be making me better or worse. It's not going to be a neutral. There is no, like, inertia is the most powerful force in the world, but it's also the force of decline, right? And so I'm in control of who I want to be. And I think that's the question to be asking.
I love it.
And in a perfect complement to that, because we do think about the world differently in many ways. And so a story I've been telling a lot that I read in Hillary Clinton's book is a David Foster Wallace thing he said at a commencement address, which is two fish were swimming along and an older fish crosses their path. And he says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the young fish looks at the other fish as they cross and say, "What's water?" And so the question I think we could spend a lot more time asking is, what's the water? What's in the water? What is the water when we talk about our smartphones? How does that affect us? What's the water when we talk about consumerism as the answer to every solution we present ourselves? What's the water when we talk about conversations and dialogue and short-term consequences and long-term dysfunction? Like, what's the water with regards to sexism and racism and capitalism and all the water we swim in, I think can be really, 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 really powerful. And so I think that we have to, both of those questions go together. How do I become who I want to be in the water I swim in?
Yeah. And being aware of what that water is. That's great. Okay, so last question. You guys both have a lot on your plate. You guys do a lot of good things in the world. What do you look to? What do you read? What's your source of reset when you need one?
Beth is my source of reset.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you.
I think that is, it's easy I love information. So I take in a lot of information. But I realized that as much as I love to just bury myself in articles and long reads and books and movies and documentaries, that the biggest source of growth for myself over the last few months has been my ongoing dialogue with Beth.
I love that.
Well, I agree with that. And in order to keep moving forward in the conversation and not just get all weepy about it, I will add that having time to be contemplative is becoming increasingly important to me. I was having this conversation with someone the other day about how I have some fear about all the things that we're doing, that Sarah and I are doing, and all the things that we're trying to create and trying to be involved in. And it creates fear for me. And I said, my fear is never that we don't have something to say. My fear is that we make sure we say it the way we want to say it, and that our intention is always clear, and that we're not moving so fast that we're kind of losing it. And the person said to me wisely, I think what you need to understand is that in what you're trying to do, you're really trying to connect to God as you understand God, right? And God is not going to leave you, but you might leave God. And I said, yes. And the way that I leave God is by being busy. Mm-hmm. And that's what I worry about the most, is just being too busy to stay connected in the way that I want to stay connected. And so when you talk about resetting, for me, that is just taking a big step back and having some periods of rest and limiting my inputs for a while.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of time blocking, and I recently put a time block in my schedule that says do nothing, just so that no one can schedule it. It's not available on my Calendly link. And it's just nice to have that. So I like that. So, and connection with people is so important because of all of our consumption. Sometimes it's good to just be in conversation with another human.
Amen.
Amen. Do you guys have anything else on your mind pressing that you want to share?
No, I think we covered the big ones.
I think we did a good job. Thank you so much for being with me. This was good. I really enjoy your podcast. I've enjoyed it. More and more I've got my kids listening to, which has been a good thing.
That's cool.
Good.
Thank you so much.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.